March 1942. Paris, France. The air is thick with tension. In the shadow of the looming Nazi occupation, the city of light flickers dimmer each day, suffocating beneath the heavy boots of foreign soldiers marching through its streets. The cafés, once vibrant hubs of intellectual and artistic exchange, have become hushed refuges, the clinking of coffee cups now drowned beneath the droning sound of German patrols. Yet, within the walls of one café, something far more dangerous than the subtle rhythms of war is at play. Marie had always believed in the power of a good cup of coffee. But these days, her café was more than just a place where weary Parisians sought solace from the horrors unfolding outside. It was a lifeline. Her patrons, some of them unaware, others fully complicit, were part of a network that she had painstakingly built from the shadows. The café, located on a quiet corner of the city, was far from being an ordinary establishment. Beneath the surface of everyday life, it served as a safe house for the resistance, a gathering place for spies, and a conduit for vital intelligence. Marie's role as the unassuming owner and barista of this café was a clever disguise, one that allowed her to operate freely in the very heart of Nazi-occupied Paris without ever raising suspicion. She had always been an excellent hostess, a skill she had honed over the years. Her café was the kind of place that made people feel at home, a sanctuary where stories were shared over steaming mugs of coffee and the light aroma of fresh pastries filled the air. Yet the café was also a stage, one that Marie knew how to manipulate with the precision of a seasoned actor. The hum of conversation, the clinking of cups, the rustle of newspapers, it was all a facade. Beneath the surface, the café was a hub of clandestine activity. Marie's days were filled with the normalcy of running a café. She greeted her regulars with a warm smile, served coffee with practiced ease, and listened to the complaints of Parisians trying to navigate the reality of occupation. But her nights were a different story. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Marie shed her role as a café owner and became a different person altogether. She became a spy, a messenger, and a guardian of secrets. Every night, after the last customer had left and the doors were locked, the café transformed into a meeting place for resistance fighters and Allied agents. Marie, by day, a simple woman running a small café, by night was at the center of a covert operation that would play a key role in the Allied victory. Her involvement in the resistance had started small, a whisper here, a passing comment there. But as the war dragged on, and the Allies' need for intelligence grew more urgent, so too did Marie's role. She became a trusted point of contact, passing along crucial information to British intelligence. Every evening, she would take a piece of paper scrawled with coded messages and tuck into a loaf of bread or a jar of jam. To the unknowing eye, it looked like an ordinary delivery, but for those who understood, it was a lifeline. These small acts of defiance were Marie's way of fighting back, and she had no illusions about the risks she was taking. Every delivery, every message she sent could be her last. Yet, as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, she found herself more deeply entrenched in this underground war. She wasn't just a passive observer. She was an active participant, one whose courage was quietly changing the course of history. The paradox of Marie's life was that no one suspected her. She was too ordinary, too inconspicuous, and that was her power. In a city where everyone was under suspicion, where betrayal lurked around every corner, Marie was overlooked. She was the friendly café owner who had nothing to hide, no agenda beyond serving coffee and pastries. The Germans were focused on the larger targets, the loud resistance leaders, the men who spoke out in the streets, the voices that challenged the regime in bold, defiant terms. Marie, however, had learned that true defiance was often silent. It was the whispers in the dark, the small gestures that no one could trace. It was in the ordinary, the mundane, that true resistance could thrive. But the weight of living a double life was becoming increasingly difficult to bear. Each day, Marie found herself carrying a burden of secrets that she could not share with anyone, not even her closest friends. She smiled at the same customers every day, offering them their regular drinks, chatting with them as if everything were normal. But beneath her calm exterior, her mind was always working, calculating the next move, the next delivery, the next coded message. There were moments when the tension felt almost unbearable, when the thought of being caught, of everything falling apart, felt too overwhelming to ignore. But then she would see the familiar faces of the resistance fighters walking into her cafe, quietly asking for their drinks, exchanging coded words, and she would remember why she did this. The stakes were higher than her own safety. Lives were on the line, and if she faltered, it would be more than just her own world that would crumble. Despite the immense pressure, Marie was not alone in her fight. The cafe had become a meeting point for an eclectic group of people, each of whom had their own reasons for joining the resistance. There was Henri, the nervous schoolteacher who had lost his wife in a bombing raid. There was Luc, the burly mechanic who had fought in the Spanish Civil War and was now living in hiding. And then there was Pierre, a former military officer who had turned to espionage after his family was arrested by the Germans. Each of these individuals brought something unique to the table, whether it was their knowledge of codes, their ability to forge documents, or their connections to the underground railway system. But what bound them all together was their shared sense of purpose, their desire to see the Nazis driven out of France and to reclaim their city from the clutches of tyranny. The café, for all its warmth and familiarity, was also a place of great risk. At any moment, a German officer could walk in and everything could come crashing down. Marie knew this all too well. The thought of her café being raided, of the men and women she had come to trust being captured or killed, haunted her every night. And yet, she continued. She pushed the fear aside, burying it beneath layers of routine and resolve. There were too many people depending on her. The resistance fighters needed her, the Allies needed her, and perhaps most importantly, Paris needed her. But despite her dedication, Marie knew that her position was precarious. The Germans were no fools. They had spies of their own, and it was only a matter of time before they began to suspect that something was amiss. She had heard whispers about a German officer who had started frequenting cafes in the area, looking for any sign of resistance activity. His name was Karl, and he was rumored to be a ruthless interrogator. Every time he entered the cafe, Marie's heart would race. She would force herself to stay calm, to smile as she handed him his coffee, but inside, her mind was racing, calculating the quickest route to safety. She could feel his eyes on her, watching, waiting for a mistake. But Marie was careful. She knew how to blend in, how to keep her secrets well hidden. One evening, as the cafe emptied and the last light of day faded from the windows, Marie received an unexpected visitor. He was a man she didn't recognize, dressed in a heavy coat, his face obscured by a shadow. He didn't speak at first, just sat quietly in a corner, his eyes scanning the room. Marie's instincts kicked in, and she immediately began to assess the situation. Who was he? What did he want? Could he be one of the enemy? Her mind raced as she considered her options. But before she could decide how to proceed, the man stood and walked towards her. He was tall, his movements deliberate but not hurried. As he reached her, he spoke in a low voice. "I need your help." Marie looked into his eyes and saw something there, something desperate, something familiar. She had seen this look before. This man, whoever he was in trouble. And somehow, in that moment, Marie knew that her quiet life was about to change forever. Her world of deception and secrets, of coded messages and covert meetings, had been built on a delicate foundation. But that night, the cracks began to show. Every decision from this point on would carry the weight of life and death. The risks had never been greater. Yet Marie, standing in the dim light of her cafe, felt a surge of something deeper than fear, something she had been searching for all along. Purpose. September 1943. Paris, France. The air was thick with the scent of autumn, but beneath the faint perfume of fallen leaves and damp earth, there was a deeper, more foreboding smell. The oppressive presence of occupation lingered like a shadow over every corner of the city. The streets were quieter now, the once vibrant pulse of the city stifled under the boots of German soldiers. People moved through the streets with a kind of hushed urgency, their eyes cast downward, as if the weight of the occupation was pressing them into the very cobblestones beneath their feet. But inside the cafe, things remained unchanged. At least, that was how it appeared. Marie had grown accustomed to the routine of the cafe. The ringing of the doorbell as customers entered, the soft clink of cups and saucers, the quiet murmur of voices blending into the background noise of everyday life. To the casual observer, she was still the same warm, welcoming cafe owner, offering her regulars their coffee and pastries with a kind smile. But beneath the surface, the cafe had become something far more dangerous, a center of resistance, a nerve center for espionage, and a sanctuary for those fighting the German occupiers. By now, Marie had built a network of loyal and trusted individuals, each playing their part in the intricate web of resistance that she had woven. The cafe, which had once been a place of casual conversation and fleeting encounters, had transformed into a space of calculated secrecy. She had learned to read the subtle signs of trust and suspicion in her visitors. A brief touch of the hand, a whispered phrase, the exchange of a particular gesture. They were all part of a complex system of communication that kept the operation running smoothly. The war had made everyone paranoid, but it had also sharpened Marie's instincts. She could tell when someone was lying, when a familiar face wasn't quite as it seemed, or when a visitor was carrying more than just a bag of bread under their arm. It was a dangerous game she played, and one that required a constant balancing act. She had to maintain the illusion of normalcy to keep up the appearance of a cafe owner simply going about her daily life. The Germans had their eyes on every corner of the city, and while they were focused on the larger, more overt forms of resistance, Marie knew that it was the small, quiet acts that often mattered most. And so, she kept up her facade, smiling at her customers, making small talk, and offering her unwavering hospitality to anyone who walked through the door. But at night, when the last of the regulars had left and the streets were empty, the cafe would transform. It became a place where plans were made, where messages were passed, and where lives were put on the line with every spoken word. But as the weeks wore on, the risks grew greater. The Germans were tightening their grip on the city, and their methods of tracking down resistance members had become more sophisticated. Marie's network was growing, but so too was the network of informants and spies that the Gestapo had embedded within the city. The tension in the air was palpable. Every conversation felt like it might be overheard. Every glance exchanged laden with suspicion. Marie had always known that the resistance was a fragile thing, an underground movement that thrived in secrecy but was always one step away from exposure. Now, that fear of exposure was no longer an abstract concept. It was real, tangible, and it was closing in on her. One evening, as the last few patrons sipped their coffee and the cafe lights flickered softly in the dimming light, a man entered the cafe whom Marie didn't recognize. He was tall, with a lean face and dark, intense eyes. He wore a trench coat, the collar turned up, as if he wanted to blend in with the shadows. There was something in his demeanor that immediately set her on edge. He moved with purpose, scanning the room before settling into a corner seat, his back to the wall. Marie could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She had seen this look before. It was the look of someone who had been trained to hide in plain sight. She went about her work, taking orders and serving the last few cups of coffee, all the while keeping a close eye on the newcomer. There was something unsettling about him. He wasn't just a regular patron looking for a drink. No, he had come for something else. But what? And why tonight? Marie's thoughts raced as she pondered the possibilities. Could he be a German officer? Was he a member of the Gestapo? Or was he simply another resistance fighter, someone sent to deliver a message or seek refuge? Her instincts told her to approach cautiously. She continued to serve the remaining customers, moving about the cafe with practiced ease, all the while keeping the man in her peripheral vision. He didn't make any move to approach the counter. Instead, he sat quietly, his eyes occasionally flicking toward her as if he were waiting for something, waiting for her to make the first move. As the last of the customers left, Marie felt the familiar weight of the night settle over her. The cafe, once filled with the hum of conversation, was now eerily silent. The man was still there, watching her with quiet intensity. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves, and then she walked toward him. "Can I help you, monsieur?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension she felt in her chest. The man looked up at her, his gaze piercing, as if he were measuring her every word. "I hope so," he said quietly, his accent thick but unmistakable. "I'm looking for someone." Marie's heart skipped a beat. The words hung in the air like a threat. She had heard this line before, many times in fact. It was a common phrase among resistance members, but it was also a phrase that could mean something much darker, something far more dangerous. She forced herself to remain calm, to keep the facade of the friendly cafe owner intact. "Who are you looking for?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. The man hesitated for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "I've been told you're reliable, that you can be trusted." Marie's mind raced. Reliable? Trusted? Who had told him that? Who had sent him? She couldn't afford to make a mistake now. Every decision she made carried the weight of someone's life. She had to be sure. Her silence stretched for a moment longer than was comfortable, but finally she spoke again. "Who sent you?" she asked, her voice low. The man's eyes flickered, and for a brief moment, Marie saw something in them, a flicker of recognition, of shared understanding. It was enough. He wasn't here to harm her. At least, not directly. He was one of them, one of the resistance. But who was he? And what was his purpose? "I have a message," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And a request. There's a mission coming up. We need you to pass something along." Marie nodded slowly, her mind already working, processing the information. She had been prepared for moments like this, moments when the stakes were higher than ever, when one wrong move could mean disaster. But still, something about the man unsettled her. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than met the eye. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady but with a slight edge of concern. The man leaned forward, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "It's not just a message. It's a person," he said softly. "We need you to help get him out." Marie frowned. "Who?" The man hesitated, then spoke the name. It was a name that sent a chill down her spine, a name she hadn't heard in months, not since the war had begun to take its toll on the city. Lieutenant Dubois. Marie's heart sank. Lieutenant Dubois was a French officer who had been captured by the Germans during an early skirmish. His capture had been a significant blow to the resistance. He had been an invaluable asset, a man who had coordinated countless operations against the Germans. The thought of him still being alive was a surprise. Many believed he had been executed long ago. The fact that he was still in the hands of the Germans was both a tragedy and an opportunity. If they could free him, it would be a major victory for the resistance. But the risks were immense. "I'll help," she said, her voice firm now, the decision made. She could feel the weight of the task settling over her like a cloak. This mission, this man, would change everything. She could no longer hide in the shadows. The stakes had just gotten much higher. The man nodded, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of gratitude and urgency. "You won't regret it. We need to move quickly." Marie looked out the window, her mind racing. There was no turning back now. She had already risked so much, but this was different. This was bigger. It was a step into a world she had known existed, but had only now begun to truly comprehend. A world where every action carried life or death, where trust was both a weapon and a liability.